Okay, well, we will go ahead and get started with the webinar now. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Learn to Effectively Script in ACL, the keys to getting started and fully automating your testing. I'm Jim Kaplan, founder of AuditNet, and with us today is my colleague and friend, Rich Lanza, an ACL and audit software expert and a data magician. This webinar represents a collaboration between AuditNet and AuditSoftware.net in delivering a training series focusing on audit software, and we're glad you could join us. I'm going to be moderating today's webinar, and the next slide has a little bit of information about myself, which I'm not going to bore you with the details of that. Most of you know who I am, or you're aware of me, or aware of the auditnet.org website. But let me go ahead and let Rich introduce himself, and then I will he'll turn it back to me, and I'll do the housekeeping items. So, Rich, if you would introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Well, welcome everyone. Rich Lanza here. Thanks again for coming today as well. And we're going to spend a lot of time with scripting. Something I started out with in the DOS version of ACL, so that's kind of why I like scripting a bit more than probably others. But we will show you it's not that scary, and you can make one in about 2 minutes, and been using ACL for close to or over 20 years now, actually, that I think about it, and hope to impact that on you as we go on in today's session. So yeah, Jim, I'll head back to you and get back to the housekeeping.
Thanks, Rich. Okay, we do have some housekeeping items that we want to get out of the way. And the first is the webinar is materially the property of AuditNet and Cash Recovery Partners, so unauthorized usage or recording of the webinar or any of its material is strictly forbidden. In addition, because we are doing an evaluation at the end of this webinar, so please take a few moments to fill out the evaluation questions to help us improve our webinars. In addition, because today's webinar qualifies for CPE, we will be putting up polling questions relating to the material covered in compliance with NASBA rules. The question period will remain open for about a minute, so it is important that you respond. And I say it's important for you to respond because that is how we determine whether or not you qualify for CPE. We don't monitor the questions for a correct response, but we do monitor that you at least responded, which means that you're paying attention. Those answering the questions will receive their CPE certificate by email within 7 to 10 business days, and this applies only to the live session as we are unable to offer CPE for the recorded webinar. In addition, we will take your questions during the webinar. Submit your questions via the chat window at the lower right-hand box on your screen. Type your question and press return to send it. Any question we're unable to answer by the end of the webinar will be answered directly within 48 hours. We have a few technical items. If you're having trouble with the webinar software, check to see if Java is enabled and whether you have any pop-up blockers disabled. If you're still not able to get the webinar to function, log out and log back in again. If you can connect to the webinar on the audio portion but get kicked off at any time, just reconnect using the same steps you used at first. Thank you again for joining us. Without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Rich. The next slide that you're looking at now has a disclaimer. I'm not going to go into the details. You all received the handouts. You can read the disclaimer, but I want to devote as much time as possible to Rich, to today's topic of scripting in ACL. So, Rich,
great.
The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Jim, and thanks again. Okay, so just continuing on here, I wanted to go to the learning objectives. There's quite a bit here. I almost don't want to, one by one go through all this because obviously we are going to go through all of this today. But overall, we are going to understand the value of automating work and scripting. And most importantly, I think, how to build that script in 2 minutes, which is really the first thing we do just to kind of get you acclimated. And then I am going to talk to you about 101 ACL applications, which is a book, online book that you will get as part of the webinar. It will come as a link. It'll take about a week to send it to you, and we'll talk to you about the videos and files that come to you. But it'll take about a week or so to get to you. But then that will provide you with the information to run about 100 scripts, or over 100 scripts. I think it's 101. And by doing so, you should be able to use those scripts yourself. You should be able to modify those scripts, and hopefully they'll prove very useful for you. One thing that we'll also talk about is building dialogues, which is kind of to get user input into the scripting. And from there on out, for the most part, we end up more or less going through a lot of intermediate advanced techniques. And the theory behind that is, I really just, I find every day, even today, I'm kind of working on a project where I'm essentially doing an advanced technique, and it's sort of new and different and never did it before kind of thing. What I find in a lot of the ACL work that I'm doing is you end up learning a lot about ACL and new script techniques by getting a challenge, some new way of taking a data file, and it's horizontal data and you need to make it vertical, and you need to switch it all around. It might be easy to do in Excel, you do like a copy paste transpose, but in ACL it becomes quite difficult. But it's a challenge. You can play with ACL obviously and get to that right answer. And in doing so, you learn a lot of these intermediate techniques. So hopefully, between the training today and hopefully you're able to kind of take the tools that we're giving you and apply that to a lot of your intermediate sort of advanced techniques in the field. But with that said, I did want to get going here, right into the value of scripting and building a script in 2 minutes. And if you just give us a second here, we will get started with that. What I find is that scripting creates a toolbox, and for the most part, what I've done over the last few years is created a toolbox myself, and my first book that I wrote was 101 ACL Applications, and that actually was called 101 ACL Applications, a Toolkit for Today's Auditors. So, even starting back about 15 years ago when that came out, we also, had a lot of vision and thought as to utilizing those types of scripts at the time as well. And, when we think about what are you going to use scripting for the most part, it's for routine tasks. And what I find is that it's great for any sort of periodic audit steps that you might need to complete. It's great for any sort of assisting in kind of bringing in similar data, so that if, what I get a lot of times is I'll get many data files, and for those many data files, I need to essentially, import each one at a time, but it's so hard, I think, and boring to do that in a manual way. What I found is sometimes you get about 50 of them at a time, and it's just so much easier and better to just simply say we're going to upload or open up each one of them in a script, extract the record to a merged file, and then bring them all together. So we will be talking about how you can turn your routine tasks into scripts. What I also think, though, back to the toolbox thought, is that you build quality in once. So as opposed to, kind of like the Ronco commercial out there, you set it and forget it. And in a lot of ways, you can really set and forget your ACL scripts once you've built them. I would say tested them, reviewed them, make sure that they work properly, and then you could set it and forget it. What I find is I build scripts that have hundreds of steps within them. However, you build the quality in once, and then you set it and forget it. What I also like about it is, there was a value in learning ACL for DOS in my early years, in that you start to understand what's going on behind the scenes of ACL by reading the code. And the code is not that hard to read. You can actually understand how ACL works and what variables are, and why do I need this word unmatched in there, and what is this and what is that. It's all kind of part of the script language of ACL, because bottom line, whenever you're using the toolboxes and other types, or excuse me, the dialog boxes of ACL, the wizards, in the background, all it's doing is writing that code for you based on your user input into those dialog boxes. Okay, so again, a lot of value here. I've started out writing in DOS, so
I don't actually a lot of times write scripts from scratch anymore. I'll show you how I make scripts nowadays, but at the time it was one of the only ways to do it, so you had to get by. Just go to the next slide. So I feel that there is a process to running data, and this process really doesn't change in a in a new or scripted fashion. I mean, you still want to follow all of the same steps that you used to follow. It's just that nowadays you want to also kind of script them at the end of the day, and that's even part of this 7-step process. So first off, you want to know what your audit objectives are. You want to figure out what reports align to those audit objectives. Maybe use some past reports like 101 ACL applications, which may be something to take a look at, and then to use those reports to model a better report for you. And then once you figure that out, then you start going to get data, and that's kind of the main thing that I like to say is figure out your report first, and then go get your data. You could arguably script everything and then go get your data, but that's probably going a little far. Once you get your data, you want to obviously open it, obtain it, validate it, and normalize it, and then edit that script for the data needs, because sometimes the data doesn't match up to the report the way you exactly like it to go, and then you run your report. So, again, I wanted to show this process in the beginning here because I don't think the process really changes that much when you're scripting. It's just a matter of now you're utilizing scripting technology as well. Okay, let's just go to this next slide, and then we'll jump into ACL. So there's 2 real methods that I'm using a lot to script. And I will say that for the most part, I actually use the log file of ACL to build my scripts. I don't use the script recorder that much, but I have to show it to you because I would just be remiss if I didn't show it to you. And in essence, I'm actually going to start off by showing it to you, and then we're going to talk about what's in the log file. So again, that's kind of how we'll run that through. And I guess let me now switch over to ACL, so just bear with me 1 second here. I have a couple of tables that I've set up here, a paid file and a general ledger file, and then I have a couple of scripts that I've made, and we'll be talking through these scripts as the day goes on. So first off, what I'd say is in your log file, you could, we're kind of starting off a log file that's pretty clean, but I'm just going to delete everything and just start over. What I like to do is to right-click and say add a new session. And we could call this the 2-minute script. Okay, and with that 2-minute script set up there, let me just close this, sorry, so that we have everything. And then what I'll do is I'm actually going to close that general ledger table, so I'm at a blank page here. And then we're going to take a look at the tools menu where you could say set script recorder on. Now, that script recorder is currently running, and we're able to, you notice it has the set learn on here, so we see that in the log. What I'm going to do is first go over to my paid file, and I'm going to open up the paid file. Now, just go back to the log here. I'll show you. Look, it says open paid file. So we don't have to sit here and track every step, but it's just kind of interesting. Then I'm going to run statistics, and I'm just going to run it on the check amount field first, just to kind of keep this very simple. Now, once I've done that, let me go kind of to the, well, let me show you this. If I go to edit and then go down to variables at that point, notice that there are a lot of statistics that come out, and actually, notice here, these statistics here, 4526.42 is the positive, 4444.23 is the average value of all 729 records. Notice this variable, average 1, double click on that, 4444.23. So ACL saves to the edit variables section a host of variables that you can utilize later in your scripts, and we'll talk about that in a second here. So then the next thing I want to do, now that I've run the statistic command, is I'm going to stratify my data. and I'll also do it on stratifying check amount, subtotal check amount. I'm not trying to make this a class of, how to run all these commands. We have other courses and videos on that, but just trying to quickly run some things so that you can see it. And I'll hit OK. And notice we have the stratify command already now completed. Now the next thing I'm going to do, just, again, one more thing, is I'm going to say extract data, and we'll say extract record, if, and I'll just kind of open up these fields so you can see it. In here somewhere is the check amount. There we go. Check amount is greater than, and I'm just going to put in here average 1. So that's that variable we just talked about. I'll hit the verify command. It's valid. Okay, good. And I'll call this, I guess above average checks, or actually they're invoice payments. Okay, so we have now check amount greater than that variable 4444.23 above average invoices. And notice we had 729 records before, now we have 175. I'm going to go back to my paid file, and I'll do this one more time. I'm going to do an extract if check amount is greater than, now I'll get a little crazy, I'll go 2 times average 1. And we'll do this to a file called 2 times. Actually, I'm going to do times 2 above average invoices. And now we have about 119 records that are above 2 times that 4444.23. So again, just looking here, let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. But just change my font using that this font icon here. Notice how everything is greater than about $8,900, and notice everything there is. So that's great. Okay, so that worked, and that's probably good enough for today. It was at least 2 minutes. I have all this code in here now. That's a little confusing in my opinion, but you go back to Tools and you say Set Script Recorder. Hey, where's the Off button? And you actually hit the On button again. So it's you hit it twice, and now you're going to save the script as 2-minute script. I'll call it, I'll call it a class. I already have one set up, so I didn't want to overwrite the one that I already had. And now, instantly we have this 2-minute script class, which I'll put up here. I'll delete this old one because it's just annoying us. And now we have that one here. So let's open that up. And notice all of the commands that we had in our log file are now here. So let's take a look at what we have here, the open paid file. I like to kind of open this up a little bit. We're going to talk about other best practices to include here, but I wanted to just give you some basic best practices to start out with. One thing that you probably want to start out with is add set safety off to the beginning and set safety on to the end. And if you didn't do that, every time it's trying to extract a record to a file, it's going to, kind of bark at you and say, do you want to overwrite this file? And because that's a bit annoying, we're going to set the safety off so that does not bother you anymore. The other thing we could do is also put delete all OK. And what that'll do is it'll delete all of those variables that we saw in the edit variables section. But now the delete all OK, I put at the beginning and the end. And that way, just kind of, it's sort of record keeping or cleanliness or whatever you want to call it as we go along in the scripting itself. And the last thing I would do is I would add, and we'll talk more about this later, but I'm just going to add a simple comment and say, this is the 2-minute script we recorded. And I probably would put, 6712, just to have some sort of a date there of when we did it. And then that comment gives you some guidance as to what all this gibberish down below means from an analysis perspective. So without looking too far into the code, I think a lot of you, understand how this code works. But what's nice about ACL, and like I said, is you can start to understand what's going on behind the scene of ACL. So, stratify on check amount. Okay, I'm going to use that check amount field and stratify on it. Subtotal check amount, that means I'm going to accumulate the check amount every time there is a new strata. And then we have a free, which means we're going to set what those strata are, 0, 100, 1,000, etc. And I'm going to do this to my screen, which is what we did. We ended up doing that to our screen. Then with that pay file open, we also then extract the whole record if the check amount is greater than that average one to a file called above average invoices, and we open it up. That's what that open is. So again, I don't want to go through every one of these, but you can very quickly start to understand what ACL is doing, and it's really not that hard. I think once you understand how the dialog boxes work, to then relate that back to how the script works. So let's close the script. It's going to save that. And now, what I can do is, because I would delete the log, but let me hold on to it. I'm going to create a new session, and I'm going to call it testing 2-minute script. And that's going to be my testing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run that script. And it's just saying, do you want to, save the changes to this table before you close it? It's really just the view that I made. And look at that. I mean, just within a couple of seconds there, notice we started in the log right about here. It went through and ran every bit of that code and produced all the results. And if I want to go back and say, okay, that statistic command, what happened in there? I could double click on it, has the results. Stratify command, double click on it, has all the results there. And then those two files we created, above average invoices times 2 above average invoices, we can open those up, and those look the same as what we had before. So that is kind of the building of a script, how to do it, set, using the script macro, or set script recorder on. I wanted to say set macro recorder on because that's Excel and how that works. Okay, so now another way that you can work with your scripts is actually and I'm just going to highlight this whole 2-minute script, and this is why I added the new session, by the way, is I guess there's 2 ways to do it. I could utilize the one that I just tested, because that's a much cleaner version, or I could utilize the one that we edited and cleaned up. I'm going to actually use the more clean version because it has the comment code and set safety off and all that. So I'm just going to select now the testing 2-minute script, and notice how it highlights every one of those commands. Now the do 2-minute script class, we kind of have that in there already, so let me deselect that, and now everything else is there. So let me just right-click that, and now that I've right-clicked that, I can save selected items to a script, and we can call this log file save, 2min, something like that. And now we have a script here called log file save 2min. I could open that up, and notice that has pretty much everything that we talked about. It's, you may want to clean it up a little bit. It opened up things twice, kind of thing. It opened up the file and then opened it up again. So we'll get rid of that. And we could delete some of that stuff we did afterwards because I was playing around. I always like to put a carriage return between each line of code, which is totally acceptable in ACL. And amazingly, we're back to having this script. Now, if you wanted to look at this script, I can push on the push pin up here, and then I can open up the 2-minute script class, push pin there as well. And I can go back and forth between the two and kind of see, what differences and, if there are any, really, there shouldn't be any differences between the two at this point, between these 2 files. So again, that's a way to create the script in 2 ways. I will be on, and I'll save changes, that's fine. I will be honest with you and say that I generally will add a new session. So let me just do that again. I'll kind of come down here and say, yep, add a new session. I'll put in a session name. And then I'll do lots of work, and then that new session will all be recorded there, and then that is what I'll use as my script. Similar to building any sort of macro for Excel, I try to play around first, figure out what I want to do, and then I go into my scripting and actually do a final production of it, like probably anything else. You measure a couple of times, and then you do it for real. So that would be something that I would also suggest that you do here as well.
Okay, so we've listed up our first polling question, and the answer D, by the way, is building scripts, for what it's worth. But what comes first? Identifying data sources, requesting data, building scripts, or listing report ideas. So getting data sources, listing report ideas, requesting data, or building scripts are the four. We do this from time to time throughout the day or a few hours here, and we ask that you quickly respond. That way we can move on into the course, and we will be having a break, I think, at like the third question. So, figure where we are now, and we try to do a bunch of these, but by the third question we should be set. About 90% of you have voted, thank you. And probably what I'll do is at this point, normally we do ask for questions. So if people have any questions, it's a great time for it. And if not, we will carry on. Again, thank you again. Everybody has voted, so I'm going to close the poll, share the poll. I think both of them are not so bad off of questions. Technically, I had question B, listing report ideas, is the first one to do in that exercise, because you really want to think about all of the different items that you would want to do auditing on, and then go get the data after that. That would be my line of logic there. But a lot of times, sometimes it is easier getting a data file and then playing with it a little bit and going back with questions afterwards. So I can't completely say question A or answer A is wrong. Anyway, I haven't seen any questions come in, so I am going to kind of kick back over into the session here. And in this next session, what we're going to do is talk about how a load of ACL scripts that I'm sending you in the next week with the 101 ACL applications, how you can make use of that, how you can actually take that book, take it apart, utilize a lot of the script code, which is in an ACL document that you can use, as you will see. So let me hide the poll here, and we will get started in just a second.
And now I want to start talking about hard-coded scripts as well as dialog boxes. Okay, so 101 ACL applications, but we have 100 of these reports all hard-coded, has all the scripts, the audit objectives, everything in there, and it also has a book. And I wanted to show you the book a bit before jumping into any more discussion here. And bear with me just one second here as I switch over to that book. Okay, so the motivation behind the book, by the way, and it's hard for you to read all of this online, but it was really to say, hey, it's 9 a.m., you just started up ACL, you don't know what to do, and you need to start running some reports because your manager said it's time to get started. So we have our 7 steps to power applications, which is what we talked about a bit before, but let me kind of go down to one of these applications so that you can get an idea. And I think, let me see if this will work for me today. And probably not, so that made it hard for me. Bear with me one second. So let me just go down to one of these scripts, try to find this for you. And the reason I do this is I'm also a big believer in documentation, and I just feel as though that documentation is a very useful step and something that, unfortunately, especially in scripting, you can forget about. And this is a script that we're going to talk about a lot today. This is calculating a weighted days payable outstanding. It's accounts payable 11. I've renamed it in our scripting, but it's accounts payable 11. And I wanted to show you how I outlined my test. And what we used to call these are test sets or part of a toolbox. And again, there's over 100 of them in this book. So taking a look at this, we have basically the overview of what we're trying to do in the test, the audit objective being tested, the data fields that we need in order to run that particular test. And those are there are about 5 of them there, by the way: check amount, discount, check date, invoice date, vendor name. And then we have the batch, which I go into a lot of depth here, and you can see our interest rate was back in 1997 was up to about 7% at banks, I believe, or maybe that was the lending rate. But these days rates have gone down in the U.S. quite a bit. But as you look at this, it explains a lot of the code, and we're going to talk about how to build some of these fields that we're talking about. I don't know if you have to document it as well as I did in the book. I mean, that may be a little bit too much. But I think even just to have a copy of the script in a Word document after your audit objectives and data fields that you need, and last but not least, even having a bit of the audit steps that you might want to perform on those script results, I think would be a very useful thing to have. And again, it just helps in passing along this information to others. Now, the one thing that we did not have in 101 ACL applications, but we had in later tool sets, was the use of the dialog boxes. So what we had to do was hard code everything into ACL. So if you had the word vendor name and check amount and invoice date and check date, these were fields that you had to rename your file and your fields to look like that. So let's kind of go back into ACL and kind of show you what I'm talking about there. So I have the Ven Interest 101, and we're going to talk later about the Ven Interest Payables test set. This one has dialog boxes. This one does not. So let's take a look at that one here. Notice here it's opening up a file called paid file. Notice my file is called paid file. If it's called paid file 1 here, this thing will not run. When I open up the paid file and take a look, notice the check amount field is there. Notice this is the check amount field. So again, I think everyone understands we need to hard code this script. And what I find that you need to do in order to get this to run properly is you have to do a bit of a control find. So, if you're sitting here and saying, well, I don't know why you'd want to do this. Personally, I think it's easier to change the field's name that you're using as opposed to changing it in the script. Another thing that you could do, and what we would used to do, is let's say this was called, let's say the client, actually, bear with me 1 minute. I just know ACL is going to bark at me. You need to close your view before you do this. If, let's say, in my table layout, the check amount was instead called something like, APX0015 CHK, and we all know that to be known as check amount, but it's not really called check amount in the file. What you can do is create a new expression or a calculated field, and in the default value put APX001 CHK, and then in the name just call it check amount. So all I'm doing here is I'm creating like a temporary calculated field called check amount, so my script will run, but I'm not impacting the file structure in any way. Of course, I didn't test this for today, so it'll probably bomb on me, but here we go. So I'm going to run the Ven Interest 101, and sure enough, it ran through perfectly. Even though I had a field in there called, some crazy name, it was able to still run that script. I'm not going to worry too much about the results here right now. The point is, it ran all of this code based on data files that we had previously set up, with a few changes. The 101 ACL application, the approach to the scripts were to rename files to equal the script table names, to rename the fields to equal the field names, and then adjust the variables in the script as you need to. So we're going to talk about the variables part next, but I wanted to just note that if you had a variable in there like an interest rate of 7%, that you would need to adjust that to say 3% or 2% or whatever it is today. And maybe what I'll do is I'm going to now show, we're going to talk about the vendor interest payables test set version. And the payables test set is also a book out there that you can get. But again, if you sign up for a lot of our subscriptions, you get it for free these days. So maybe take a look at that as well. It has the same functionality that we had in 101. It can be universally applied, though, because you select the data table, the data fields, and you get to set the interest rate as well. So we're not going to do that. And what we're now going to do is go into ACL and take a look at the vendor interest payables test set. And I have a few of these built already, and what we'll then talk about is essentially how to rebuild some of these ourselves. So let's just kind of take a look at this script here, and then I'm going to open up the vendor interest 101 script as well so that you can kind of see the differential. So one thing you'll notice, and it may be a little hard to do this on the fly here to be honest, but we have like open paid file here, and then this one we have the open input file here. So that's one way to kind of see the differential. And what is the input file? So let's take a look at this dialog box, this first one here, and the dialog box basically opens up and says, compute lost interest in days outstanding. Step 1, select paid invoice file. So you can double click on that, and you have the variable input. And it came from these categories that we were able to select. And we're going to rebuild this in a second, but I just wanted to show you that. Let me discard that. And then the next thing we're going to show in the dialog box setting is the selection of the fields, as well as putting in an interest rate. So invoice date, I called it description 1. Probably should have named it a bit better. Vendor name, description 3, check date, description 2, etc., field 1, and probably field 2 or discount. And then the enter discount percentage, I put in percent. So again, probably best practice that was not in here at the time was to put check date here, or maybe check underscore date, or V. Probably a nice thing to put would be like V check date, something like that. So variable check date. But for now, we're just going to go with it as is. And once those inputs are set up, you can then utilize ACL to then essentially kind of open up the table and go through and recalculate all of the things that we did in this here. So again, not going through it in detail, but you can kind of see a lot of it's the same. Now the one difference as you look at this is that I'm putting these percentage marks around the variable names. So we have %1 equivalent to the percentage divided by 100. And we'll talk a little bit about this in a second, defining fields. We'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes on this. But you notice here, the only thing I'm trying to get across is that whenever we use a field in a script, we're going to actually put them in between percentage marks. So this was, I think, like, check date minus invoice date. This was the check amount field. Again, check date minus invoice date. And onward here. So as you kind of see the input file, we also had in percentage marks as well. So let me run through the script just to kind of show you what I always like to do is I practice what I preach. I always like to run this, and kind of see what it looks like. It gives me this first statement. We'll talk about this in a minute. The application will summarize vendor activity with weighted days payable outstanding. Okay, that's interesting. So then we're going to select the paid file, because we know that. We could call it anything, by the way. It could have been called check invoice file 2012. It's going to still work because we're using variables in the script. Invoice date, vendor name, discount field, invoice amount field, which I guess in this case I'm going to even get crazy here and pick that different field name, and then check date. And interest percentage, maybe I'll put in 3% because it's probably a little more accurate. and it ran through, and it gives me this pause statement. Days payable outstanding, it's been calculated, and we even stratified some stuff in the window here. So if I go back here and I look for my last stratify statement, which is here, I can double click on the stratify statement, and you can actually see the actual stratification that I created. Okay, so let's now go back and say, well, what happened there? What did we do to create that script? And again, why I like giving you some of these sample scripts here, not only the ones we created, but also some of the pre-made ones, because it really gives you an opportunity to go through some of the scripts that we've built and try to understand more how variables are defined and how ACL works behind the scenes. Okay, so let me select this payables test set. Okay, so now that we're in here, notice the first thing that came up was this pause statement. And let me rerun this pause statement so you know what I'm talking about. I'm going to put the pause statement in my command line. By the way, the command line, which is here, is something that I can go to Window, Show Command Line whenever I'd like. I can write, just kind of put that in there, copy and paste it. It looks a little funky, but it'll work. I can hit my Run button, and look at that. It gives me a bit of a pause statement. I like putting pause statements at the beginning and end. They may be annoying to some people, but I think it's kind of nice to watch and read what you're about to do, and then when you're done, have it tell you, oh, by the way, we created this file, and we did this, and we did that, and all of that is now part of the actual script itself and part of documentation. Okay, now what I'm going to do is redo this dialog box here. So I'm going to actually comment out this dialog box, which this one is where we select the file. Notice it has this select file here. Okay, so what I'm going to now do is I'm going to basically build a new dialog, which is up here, build new dialog, and I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger so people can see that. And what we'll then do is, you could do a few different things here, but I'm just going to kind of keep it simple. We'll maybe what I'll do first off is just kind of walk you through quickly. What you can do is you can add those text boxes just to explain select invoice payments table. And that's just a little note. So let me just double click on that again. You have the ability to set the X and Y position of where it's going to be. You can do left, you could do center it, maybe center it in the middle there if you'd like. And then you could enter an edit box, which is like a little bit of a just putting in a name in there, or a variable name, or in this case we put in the interest rate. You could do a checkbox, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but just noting that. You could put a radio button, again, a little bit later, but you could do that. You can also do this one, drop-down list. And the drop-down list will allow you to actually select items on a list, which might be, maybe scripts that you want to run or reports you want to run. But you only get to select one. The radio box, you only get to select one. The checkbox, you could set up 10 checkboxes here, and you could select each checkbox. The last thing, which is what we're going to talk about, so I wanted to go through all these first, is the project item list. And we'll select that. And then I can click on so notice my cursor changed, and it changed into a little box, and I can then click here, and I can call this input. So my variable name is going to be called input. Now, what I can select based on that are a variety of things. I'm going to select tables just to keep it simple, but I could select a character field, date fields, scripts, tables, views, and all these different things. But we're just going to select table and click the Add button, and that adds it over here, and hit the OK button. I could, by the way, I should note this, in the default setting, you could say, you could put, select table, paid table, or something like that. And then that kind of tells people what it is and what they should select there. You kind of set it up here already, but this is useful. I have to say, if you needed to put in a date format, So if you said, I want you to enter a date in here, this is how I would normally put the default setting, like, this is how I want you to enter the date in, and then it tells people, oh, okay, you want me to put year, 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 month, month, day, day. Let me destroy the default, keep it blank, and we'll just have select payments table. Now what that's going to do, and I'll just clean this up a little bit so it's a little tighter, is now we are able to select the input variable. And that's going to be a table. And then that input variable is going to be utilized by this script. So here's our dialog box here. To view a dialog box later, you can double click on it and select this button, Edit Command. And that'll bring you right back to there. I commented it out at our old one, and then I do have the open input file here. So what this dialog, this project dialog does is it reaches into the project itself so that you can grab tables and fields and all those good things. So let's run this vendor interest PTS again. Again, it gives me the pause statement. Notice this is the new dialog that I've set up. I'm going to select the paid file, and it continues on, with the script here. I guess I'm going to cancel out of this. If I cancel out, it'll say, do you want to cancel? You say yes, and you're back to your paid file here. So with all that said, that is how to set up a dialog box, and also the difference between something like in the payables test set that you get and something that you could get within the 101 ACL applications where you need to hard code everything. In this one, you don't need to hard code anything. You just have to be very careful and utilize the actual variables surrounded by percentage marks throughout the script itself. So no hard-coded field names when you do that.
Okay, second polling question up there, as you can see now. What is put at the beginning of a script to have it overwrite existing tables and not stop in between? Is it set overwrite on, set overwrite OK, set safety off, or set safety on? So what is put at the beginning of a script to have it overwrite existing tables? And we'll just give everyone a little bit there. If you do have any questions, I'll talk about a question that came in that hopefully you guys see online. But as you have more questions, comments, feel free to pop them in here. And thank you. Most of you have voted so far, so thanks again for kind of speeding this along. And in the next section, as you're answering this, I will note we'll spend a bit of time now going through all of the different dialog boxes in ACL. So I feel like it's basically to get user input from people. And I'd be remiss if I didn't go through all of those. It seems to be something that I use quite frequently. Okay, everybody's voted, so let me close that off and share that with you. Yep, the majority are correct. Set safety off is what's going to allow ACL to kind of turn off its safety, and then set safety on obviously is to kind of turn it back on, and you really should put it back on at the end of a script. One of the questions that came in was a little more advanced, not too bad. It was just talking about variables, and we're going to talk a bit about variables coming up. I know we touched on it, but we'll definitely talk more about it with the dialog variables. With that said, the question kind of noted if you had a calculated field and it was based on a variable, what happens like when I close ACL, or if I delete all OK, which is one of the comments there to delete all the variables, it will delete basically the premise of that field. So the calculation that field was based upon, let's say it's A minus B or something in ACL's mind, it doesn't really know what A and B are anymore when you delete them all. So it does lead to an error. So the way around that is whenever you have these calculated fields and you want to kind of set everything, you really need to extract the fields to a new table. If you extract the record, it will extract everything over. If you extract the fields, it will only extract the physical field It'll calculate it. It'll give you kind of, if the answer A minus B is 2, it would put 2 in that field. It wouldn't have a variable anymore. So, I did want to note that. And so that's the one question, a little more advanced, but wanted to make sure I got that in there. And someone is also saying, ACL, even though they put in set safety off, it did kind of prompt for overwrites. It depends. I'd almost have to see kind of where it's happening. But if it is just a normal kind of join table and create a new table from it, and it's going to overwrite an existing table, ACL should do that with the set safety off. The one thing that I can think about, I'm just trying to think here, it is fields. I know that ACL, if you have a field calculated already, you've defined a field and you say, define the invoice amount field as a calculated field, ACL will say that the invoice amount field already exists, and there's ways around that, and hopefully I think we're going to talk about that a little later today in the scripting. But it really should work. So I'd almost have to see that example to be able to really tell you. And the only thing I could think of is maybe there's a set safety on elsewhere in the actual scripting. I don't know if there's any other questions. Otherwise, I will kind of get started here and kind of continue on. We will take a little bit more of a break at the next break or polling question, which should be in the next 20 or 25 odd minutes or so here. So unless there are no more questions, I will hide the poll and kind of show my screen here. And again, we're going to jump now into developing each dialog box.
Which I find is the most versatile in selecting your tables, your fields, even selecting variables if you wanted to do that. I tend to find that I'm rarely selecting a variable. I enter a variable in, but I'm rarely kind of selecting it. But also your scripts as well, that you may want to select a script and have it just run that way, which you could do from the project item list. But again, I usually will, as we'll show you in a few minutes, we utilize some other tools there to basically run a script if you select an item. Because what I find is no one wants to see a script name called, paid underscore test underscore interest or something. They want to see run the days payable outstanding test. That's a lot more user-friendly and interesting for use. So again, that's what we can do there. And the other dialogues, as we talked about, was the drop-down where you would put numbers and characters in there, and that might be something like you could select an interest rate, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you could select what you want. You could add a radio button, which is another one, and that would maybe say do a script if you select that radio button. Or you might have a checkbox where, again, if you had 10 reports listed out, you might want to have a checkbox for each one. You can select them, and then you can have the script run each one. And then the text entries we talked about is where you can enter the numbers and characters. So aside from the project item drop-down, these are the other drop-downs that we utilize. And again, I find the project item is the one that we utilize the most. What I wanted to do is open up the 2-minute script, and what I was going to do is now edit this script to accept all of these dialogues that we've just set up. And instead of having it be something that we could, I guess this way we're selecting it as opposed to it being hard-coded, and then this would be something that you could select. So with that said, what we'll do first off is I'm going to set up a pause statement, and in the pause statement in quotes, what I'll do is say this is a 2-minute script to extract above average invoices and calculate stats on our invoice pay data. We'll just say invoice data. So that's that pause statement that we talked about a second ago. And then what we'll do is we'll then open up a dialog, which for right here I'm going to select the Build New Dialog. And we're going to, rather quickly, because we just did this a second ago, I'm going to select the project item list. And we're going to call this input, again, just to keep it simple here. And in the category, we're going to put the table section over. And we'll open this up. And then in the text box here, we're going to note select input file. And now we have the select input file there with the drop down. I'm going to close this. And we're done. Now, what I know is that I've used this paid file throughout, so I can right-click and copy that, and then I can do a find. And when it says find what, I can say paid file, and I'm going to replace with, again, percentage marks, input, percentage marks. Find the next one, replace, replace. Now, I've replaced my hard-coded item with this input. Next one, check amount, is what we need to get rid of. So I'm going to now build a new dialog. And this is a good one to show you. Bear with me. And we'll say, select check amount. There we go. And in here, we're going to also do the project item list. But this one, I'm going to call it, maybe we can call it V underscore check AMT. So it's variable check amount. And I'm going to select numeric fields, add that to the item, and then anything that's been designated in ACL as a numeric field is something that we'll be able to take a look at. Bear with me 1 second here. Okay, and then I guess, yeah, we don't really need a default here. We have that variable check amount. I'm just going to copy this, so I'm just going to right-click and say copy. We'll hit OK. I'll just open this up so you can kind of read whatever field you put in there, hit the OK button, and now I have another dialog. And if you want to get a little crazy, I guess you could comment here and say to select table. And down here, to select fields. And then that way you know what these dialogues are. Now I'm then going to highlight the check amount field, do a Control F. It's another way to quickly put whatever's there in here. Replace it with V check amount, and then go replace. Oops, and I goofed up there. I should have put percentage marks. There we go. Rushing, replace, 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 and I just need to remember now to go back up here and put this guy in between percentage marks. So just to be safe here, I'm going to close my script and say, yes, I do want to save that so that I can go back in now, and I have not only my dialogues, but I also have my open input, statistics on check amount. Just taking a look here, what else do I need to set? I have this average one. But that's actually being set by the program itself. So it's not something that I really need to set at this point. So I'm not too worried about that. And, continuing on and through this. So I think we're good here to run this script now. So let me kind of run this, showing you how to utilize the pause statement. Select input file, paid file, select check amount, and voila, we're back and have our answer just like we had before. But now you could call paid file something completely different. You could call your check amount field something completely different, and it would work perfectly. Okay, so let's kind of go to another dialog, because we've probably explained hopefully the project drop-down well enough for you. I'm going to create a new script, and to do that, I would right-click and say New Script, and I can do that anywhere in the ACL project window over there. And in this new script, I'm going to add another couple of dialogues. So the first dialog I'm going to set Let me just kind of drag this down here. First dialog that I'm going to set is a checkbox. And I'm going to select the checkbox here, and we'll call this, again, v underscore maybe 2min, something like that, and maybe 2-minute SCR for script. So that's the variable. And in the label, I'm going to say at this point we'll call this to run the 2-minute script. Okay. Then I can select another checkbox just for fun here, and in this one I'm going to call this v, and maybe we'll call this then interest script, then int script, and in the label to run the vendor interest script. Okay. And now we have both of those in there. So now the checkboxes, and I'll put a little title to this as well by hitting the text box up here and just saying, to select scripts to run today. Okay. So I can rename this script now that I have it. I can close it. Maybe that's the best thing to do. And I'm going to rename this script and call it maybe something like underscore main menu, and then that'll bring it right to the top. So that now I have a main menu script that's going to run the 2-minute script, as well as I'll show you in a second, the vendor interest 101 script. Okay, going back to the main menu. Now the two variables that we set in here, one was called the 2-minute script, and one was called the then interest, I believe, script, and I'm just going to go back here to my dialog to check that. So v then int script, and okay, and the 2-minute script. Now what I can do is I can add a statement. If the 2min script equals t. And in this case, we're not putting the percentage marks around it, by the way. It's just, if the 2min script equals t, then what we'll do is we'll go do script, and rather than typing all this, I'm going to call it 2-minute. Oh, sorry about that. Sorry. Yes, I do. Okay, we're going to do this script here, and I'm just going to rename that. I ran it by mistake. We're going to do the 2-minute script. And then here, just to interest of time, I'll do some copying and pasting here. Okay, so first off, it's going to, if basically based on the dialog, if this variable equals t, do that script. If that equals t, then do that script. We'll hit the OK buttons and run this main menu. So let me just run the vendor interest script, because it'll just run through cleanly. And it ran the vendor interest script. Now it didn't stop at that point and start asking me all those wonderful questions that we had in here in the dialogues, because I didn't select that one. Now if I go again and say run the 2-minute script this time, I can actually go through the motions of selecting those, and it runs that at that point. And at that point, we have basically gone through the two scripts here to run through. I'm just kind of taking a look there. That should have gone through, and then that runs through those scripts there as well. So again, you're able to select each one that you want to select, and it'll run through the scripts accordingly. So that's basically how you would select using a checkbox. Let me go back to this main menu, and in this case, I'm going to comment out that dialog, and I'm going to add a new dialog box in this case. And in this one, we're actually, what I'll do here is, bear with me one second, we'll kind of add a new script here. And now we're going to select the dialog or radio button. Now the radio button is going to determine which one you're wanting to run. So we could say, run, then we'll just say the first label might be like 1, run vendor interest script. We'll add that. So that's the default. That's number 1. And that's kind of a key here. I mean, we could call it radio 1. I could call it anything I want. Maybe I'll call it, V_radio 1. And then in the other one, we'll call it run the 2-minute script. Okay, we'll add that as number 2. So now we kind of have a selection box. And again, in my text here, I'll just add, to select one or another script to run. And then that allows you to walk through the dialog box that way. Okay, so with that set up, now what we can do is I'm going to edit my script accordingly. One of them being to basically say V_radio 1, and I'm going to copy that down here. Okay, so essentially if the V_radio 1, and let me just make sure I take a look at that, V_radio 1 equals a 1, then do script 2-minute script class, then if not, do script vendor interest 101. Okay, so now that we run through the scripts here, we'll run, and I'll run the 2-minute script. And and actually, I goofed a little bit there. It really should have been the other way around. So apologize about that. Let me just fix that there. So if I run through this again and run the 2-minute script, it then will kind of walk me through running through this 2-minute script that we just built a second ago. I just goofed when I set up my main menu. Again, V_radio 1 equals 1 is the vendor interest. Let me just make sure, yep, see vendor interest. And then the second one was the 2-minute script. So that's why that was set up accordingly. So that walks you through how to do almost everything that we've talked about. The last thing that I'm just going to show you in this vendor interest payables test set is the text input. And the text input, let's take a look at this dialog box here. The text input where we said enter the investment percentage. Let's double click on that. I created a variable called PERC, PERC. That's that variable. So that is this edit box right up here on the left-hand side under the text. Sure. And we'll save that. So now that editing text box I just want to show to you in the report here. If I enter a 3 in here like we've done before, that will then be saved into the memory of ACL as a variable. And then that variable %, notice I'm using the percentage marks, divided by the 100.0000, then I can start to recalculate how that percentage will be utilized by the ACL script. So again, that walks us through all of the different types of dialog boxes within ACL, like all of the different options here that we have with regards to setting up text, edit boxes, checkbox, radio box, drop-down list, and project item lists.
Okay, so, now that we've kind of gotten done with the dialog boxes, what I'd like to do, just heading back into our slide deck quickly here, bear with me, is to take a look at some of the script editor changes. And this is something for version 9.3 and above. So most of you probably are on version 10 now of ACL. And they added some pretty nice features within the script language editor. And you know, we're going to show them to you in ACL, but this is kind of the one slide that attempts in showing you everything in one. So we have line numbering, word wrapping, color coding to talk through, and it really made I don't have the old ACL booted up here to be able to kind of show you the difference, but you know, just imagine there's no more color coding, there's no lines, there's no word wrap. So when you were kind of typing your scripts, you'd go out for a long time. And so with that said, let's kind of take a look into ACL, and then we'll come back and talk about setting up folders in just a second here. Bear with me. Bring over ACL here. So this is the new version of ACL, version 10. And you have things like word wrapping, which I'd like to get a longer, here we go, we have like this really long statement down here. If I kind of get rid of the word wrap, you know, in the old days, as you probably saw just a few minutes ago, you have to kind of go all the way, you know, out here to kind of look at things. Another thing, so you have word wrap, which helps, you know, that's number one. You'll also notice when there is a word wrap, the line number on the left here doesn't have an actual line next to it, so it does kind of keep the line of code in order. So you could say, you know, line 54 of my code, I have a question, you know, kind of thing, and that would be a lot easier to work with. You can get rid of the line numbering if you'd like, you know, so you just click on the line numbering button or icon to get rid of it. And then color coding as well, you can get rid of color coding like that. What I find interesting is being able to set the style of that coding. What you have some options here in, sorry, what's that in the view? Bear with me one second. In the color coding options here, set style, you do have an ability to start changing the comment style, color. I think, right, it's green. The command style, so commands are in this dark blue. Parameters are in more of this sort of lighter kind of blue. Functions are in red. I'm just trying to think, do I even have any red functions? Yeah, there you go. So you have like recno, which is a function that shows up with red color coding. So, you know, no big deal here, but it still makes it a lot easier when you're looking at your code. And especially if you kind of miss something, yeah, there we go. You know, if you don't completely type it out, you know, it's sort of, it looks as though it's inaccurate. So just wanted to show you some of the features there of the new script editor, just a little aesthetic but useful. Another thing you'll notice over here is this is not really a scripting point, but more of a folder point. And one of the things you can do is create new folders by selecting New and then Folder. And that'll create the new folder. You know, you could call it scripts for September kind of thing. And then you can move scripts in there. You can create new scripts into that folder. It more or less just organizes your content pretty well. I get a lot of this question, you know, a question like this one a lot of, how do I copy from another project my scripting? So if I have scripts in a folder, in an ACL document, and I need to copy those scripts over to another ACL document, you can right-click on any folder in this case, and then copy from another project script, and then you have the ability to go out and look for, you know, let's say another scripting or another area, if we're going to pull in the scripts into this one, and say, oh, it's that keyword one, which we'll be talking about that one later. So you can copy that script from another ACL document into the script, and, you know, maybe you want to call the folder, you know, copied from other ACL document. Let me just head back to the slides here just to think about what else can I show you here. Another thing is, so as we're doing our work in ACL, you can kind of you can run this command called set folder, and it's a /, if you could see that, so /. And after that, you can pretty much type anything, I believe, you know, AuditNet scripts or something like that. And what it will do is if the folder doesn't exist, it'll then, you know, open up that folder or create that folder. And then if I wanted to extract data, you know, extract if the chat or discount amount is greater than 0 to a file called extracted, it will put it into that folder. So it's another way in your scripting to kind of keep your results organized. Like in your tables section, you might want a tables and then have a new folder called results. And then you could go into your tables, click on results. So, it is a way to kind of build a bit of a parent-child relationship in the data. But I do find that set folder script command, which is right here in my code, I use that quite frequently now, and I used to not use it as much, but I am finding myself using it more and more. So I did want to talk through that. And, with that said, I did want to therefore go through a few other kind of scripting, basics with you. Actually, I did want to show you one more thing. I just remembered this, forgot to say it. In the script editor, if you want to make it quite small, you can kind of, you can use your control key. You can click on your control key, and if you just kind of roll the button that's in between the right and left buttons on your mouse, you can kind of make a very, very small version of your script so you can kind of see what you're looking at, and then, obviously expand into it and do more work. So, all right, with all that said, let me kind of get to this next polling question here, which is what is one feature not available in the script editor enhancements in 9.3 or 10? Word wrap, line numbering, spell check, or font style customization. So which one is not in there? Just looking at the questions, doesn't seem that people have any questions so far, which is fine. And we will, we'll just kind of answer them as they come in, but feel free to kind of keep posting those questions. Most of you have voted on this. We do appreciate it. And just looking here, we're doing pretty well on time, which is good. Okay. So 100% have voted. Let me close that poll and share it with everybody so you can see there. Yeah, I mean, the majority were correct. Word wrap is something we have, the line wrapping or word wrap. Spell checking is not available in ACL, but it probably wouldn't be that useful because ACL commands and such aren't maybe the most English-based in this case for my case, but. With all that said, this might be a good time to take a quick break. I know we like to take breaks, in this section. We're about halfway through the polling questions, so I figured maybe this is a good point. We're right now, I guess clockwise, I have about 12:18. I don't know if it's enough time, but I think what we should do is try to come back around 12:25. Okay, 12:27, let's get going again here, and what I wanted to do is talk about this monthly stratification, and it's going to be, this is where the course gets a little more advanced from a concept point of view, and hopefully for those that are more intermediate advanced on the call, this will be hopefully more useful in your use as well. But I think it's something because you're going to be getting all of the training files, as we'll explain, so that you can run these scripts yourself. You'll be able to kind of get access to them so you can run them. I really think everyone should be able to move along with these scripts. So with that said, I wanted to kind of note that we'll be kind of moving into the more intermediate section now. But with that said, a lot of variables and field type of calculations. And what I really like about it is once you've automated some of this field and calculations, it is something where in order to kind of do this again on another file that you might have, you'll see how a lot of complex stuff can be kind of put together so that you don't have to do it again. And it kind of shows the power of the automation, probably a little bit more so than some of the more simple examples we've been talking about. So with that said, I will kind of continue on here, and at the next break I will get to some of the questions that are coming in now as well. So, but let's kind of move on here, and just give me a second. Thank you.
Now working through a script that I enjoy a lot because it does so many things and provides such a great perspective to the data, no matter what you're working with, while at the same time teaching you a lot of complex scripting abilities. So first off, we're going to build complex conditional fields, and I want to walk through a variety of those, one of which will use the date field, and we're going to set the date up front, the format of the date, so that we can use it in a certain way. And it creates a way for you to more consistently apply date variables. We're going to be using these variables in dialog boxes, so they'll show up there, as you'll see, and using them in file names themselves, so the file name will change depending on how you edit your variables. We're going to adjust the field names as well, and then one example of that is when you export field names as another field name. So there's a lot going on here. So, invoice amount to could just be now total invoice amount when you export it to Excel. And we're really just maximizing the stratify command using this key field and then the crosstab function. And all of this is going to create a monthly stratification of your data. So you'll stratify your data, but then do it in a monthly format so that you can see month over month the change in activity, which again is really interesting, and I doubt anyone in your organization is running this, so it provides a different perspective that no one else is seeing right now. Going into ACL now, we have some scripts set up. I have a paid file that we're going to work off of. It has a check amount field, and it also has an enter date field, although we could use check date, enter date, whatever you'd like. And we're going to move into this stratification script. So taking a look at this script, what we've built here up front is a dialog box that will first select a paid file, and it's going to be putting it to an input variable. So that input variable we're going to use in a second here. Notice it's a project item drop-down list where we have tables selected, and we're putting that as the input. Okay, and we're going to then open up that input file, which is done here. Again, we're putting percentage marks around the word input in order to have ACL utilize it. And this gets a little different as we start working with variables. It's almost like you have to look back to refer back to how we're going to use certain variables later in the process, and we'll talk about that in a second. Now, in the second dialog box, I could try to find it in here, but it may be a little bit difficult, so I may just show you it in the actual item itself. So I think this is the edit box here where we have that edit to input, but let's take a look here. When we go into this dialog box and edit it, notice here we have select the following fields from the, and it's blank. Now this is where we're going to put in the variable input, and that was that edit box that we saw there. Now, between you and me, I tend to not like working with the actual code itself in the dialog box. We're going to show you how to do some of it later, but it is a little cryptic to read. I mean, it's something where, yes, you can learn it, but just like working in DOS mode, this is kind of working in DOS mode, and changing this here, the word input, and where it's saying the edit box here, and where it is located in the actual dialog and the width itself. I think kind of moving to the Windows approach, selecting that, opening it up, and then just being able to add this edit box here, which is what we did. So we just kind of added an edit box there, and see if I can get rid of that. And then we in that edit box, we just put the word input in there. And by doing so, again, it's going to kind of bring that up as the variable or default value that you can then show, because you've already set it up here in that first dialog here. Okay, now we're just going to select the invoice amount and payment date. Now, I'm going to change this, just for argument's sake, just to be amount. And in this date project item drop-down list, we've only isolated the date field. So that's the category that we brought over to that category list. And we're saving that to a variable called payDate. So I'm going to save changes to that dialog box so that we can have that. And moving forward now into the script. So now I want to talk through the first of our definition of fields where we're using a date variable. And you could do this any way you'd like in the set date format. So by setting date, what that is doing is in your options in ACL, you have the ability to set your date to whatever you'd like. And, year, month, day, or, whatever. Now, I'm using this format. You could use anything, but, we're saying set date, day, month, year. And then when we define the pay year month, now we're using some variables here. What I'm going to be doing is creating a new field that will, in essence, take the year and add to it the month, and that will be a text-based field. So we're going to actually have some text or character-based field that has the year and month added together. And to do that, we're going to take the date function of the pay date, which will convert that to a character. But knowing that the date format is day, month, year, that we can basically say we're going to then sub that at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mark. So starting at the 7 mark and extending for 4. So that's going to kind of isolate that year of the date field, which is here. And then we're going to add on to that the month of that date field, which is done there. And then that would be starting at the 4 spot. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, I guess, in the way it calculates, and going for 2. So that is how we can create this month field, pay year month field, that we're going to show later. And we also create a pay year field, which is kind of just this part up here. And with that said, I'm not exactly sure we use this field later on, except possibly in this key. Nope, we don't even use it there. So it's something where I think we just created this and left for future reference. Okay, so the sorting on pay year month to sorted open is done so that we can now calculate a stratification. Now, in the stratification, we're going to have to be a little careful in that I have decided where things begin and end. Now, if you have data that has negative items that go to the negative billion mark, I would suggest creating a stratified range that goes to the negative billion mark. Now, in my data, actually the sample data we don't even have numbers that go anywhere near these limits. So it's really not something to worry about. But with your data, keep that in mind. We need to sort that on the pay year month, because notice back over here we have this key field. And that key field, if we look at any sort of stratification, let's kind of go to the stratify command here. In the more option, we have something called a break. And we want to break on a certain field. So in the break on a certain field, we're going to break on this pay year month. And what that's going to do is it's going to calculate a stratification for every different pay year month. The only difference is we need to sort it, because ACL will go through this, and if you have, let's say, July 2012, followed by January 2011, followed by July 2012, it's going to break at every one of those instances. So you need to kind of put it in order first and then apply the stratification command. Now let's go to our pay file, and in my table layout, I have created this pay year month already based on the enter date. Have that all set up in there. I'll discard any changes. And then what we'll do is I'm going to sort on that particular field, pay year month, to a file called sorted. Now that I have that sorted, notice the enter date is pretty well sorted there. I'm going to run statistics on my check amount field. I always like to run statistics before you stratify. And then I'm going to stratify on the check amount field, accumulate check amount. Again, it gives you your minimum and maximum automatically. Noting my minimum and maximum, maybe I'll just put in here 0, let me just put in one negative item. So let me put negative 1,000, 0, 100, kind of powers of 10 here, going upwards. Okay, so that should cover us from a minimum maximum point of view. Hit the OK button. Oop, forgot to do a lot of stuff actually. So in the break field, we want to select the pay your month, and that's going to now break on that pay your month, which is now sorted. In the output file, we're going to hit the ACL table, and we can call this stratify test. And notice here, I now have a stratification by the month year with this 0, 100, 1,000, etc. And notice here that, the 0 in this case is everything up until a 0. And this is everything up until 100, and this is everything up until 1,000, and continuing and forward from there. And then that check amount field, which let's take a look at this. It's called check amount, which is a little odd because we had a check amount field, and that's now become check amount 2. So it's now we now have 2 fields. The actual computed summary or accumulated field is this check amount 2. The item that just shows us what our strat range is now called check amount. Now let's go back into the stratification script now that we know that. And let's take a look at this more complex computed field that we've created. We actually have a couple of them. So the invoice amount in this particular case, the variable, was set in the dialog, and it was what we were calculating off of. And notice it's invoice amount. It's not invoice amount 2 or anything like that. Again, the stratified range takes the form of whatever you named that amount field. And what we're doing here is we're saying, under 10 million would be items that are items up until a negative 10 million, and that's what that number is. Then this one would be everything from negative 10 million to negative 5 million, and negative 5 million to negative 1 million. And because what we have here is quite cryptic. What does that mean? I mean, we know it because we're ACL coding gurus, but for everyone else that is going to be reviewing these reports, that is more of a user reviewing it, they're never going to understand what that means. So what we're doing here is we're giving a much better name to every one of those fields. And we're now just adding things like 0 to 100, 101 to 500. So again, this is the upper limit. And that's why that upper limit is stated here. I just note, please make sure your data doesn't extend beyond this because, again, we can use this to help that process out with the under 10 million. But I think it's better to really kind of make the stratification work closer to the data that you're using as opposed to just using what I have here. Again, what we're also going to do is create another stratified item, which is a stratified order. And because up here, notice, this data, if I try to sort on this field now, it'll kind of create a jumbled mess probably. I mean, I think the 1,001 would show up right underneath the 101. The 500 would end up way down here under the 10,000 and 100,000 because it would sort by 1. And then it would go to the next number, which is 2. And then it would go to the next number, which is 5. So it'd be a sorted mess. However, if we then create a stratified order field, which is computed this way, and just to be clear, we've done this more in the basic types of videos, but if you take a look here, we're creating a stratified order, define field stratified order, and we're computing it, and then underneath that, we're basically adding a blank space. And in that blank space, or carriage return, we then, after that, start our stratified order, which is all of our conditions. And after all the conditions are done, we then have this default value of 0, which really should never come up, but you have to have something. So we threw that in there as kind of a final item. So that's going to create the 2 defined fields that really drive a lot of this monthly stratification, or really the 3 of them. We have the pay year month, the stratified range, and the stratified order. So now we're going to talk through a couple of more interesting uses of variables. And this is something, I got to be honest, I tend to have to remember a lot of times how these things are used and where we do things one way versus another. But this is where we're changing the names of variables. So again, this is a great script to go back to because it covers so many types of variable changes and usage that you really could use this as kind of your cheat sheet to get you back to understanding it. In this first one, notice how we had that check amount to. Now, invoice amount to, by creating this variable, I mean, one way of doing it is put the word assign in front of it, but let's not do that. We don't have to anymore. So we put invoice amount to equals invoice amount, which in this case would be check underscore amount, plus the number 2. So it's going to ultimately look like something like this. So that's now going to be that variable invoice amount 2. Then below that, we're going to have an output variable, which is the input file. Remember, in this case, we had a paid file. And then we're going to add to that year-month strat. And we're doing this in quotes, just like we did above. And notice that we're not using percentage marks here, right? Because that would confuse things. So we're not using that. We're just using, again, output now will be the input variable plus year-month strat. So we'll have that as well. So now when we look at this export command down below, we can notice here one last thing, and talked about in the slide, is the pay year month as payment year / month. When we're exporting this data, that is how it's going to show up in the exported data. So instead of having this, somewhat more cryptic type of field name, you're going to have this one. Stratify range, stratify order, count, as count, count percentage is percent of count. So we could say count percentage. What does that mean? Well, it's the percent of count. And you could call these things anything. But I kind of like this one here, as we're noting, where we have invoice amount 2, which again, the invoice amount 2 we set up in this variable right here. So that invoice amount 2 is now being referred to as total invoice amount. So that's all going to be in this Excel output file. And what's the output file name? Again, it's paid file underscore year month strat. So in just a few statements here where we are assigning some variables here and then using this export command with the as field names and using the output file, we're handling quite a bit here and in just one small case. And keep in mind, you should refer back to this particular script because it shows you, even though we're putting in percentage marks the output file as an example, you then have to put quotation marks around that variable that has percentage marks. So it's very different how we use these variables in the ACL scripting depending on whether or not you're using it as a file name or if you're using it as part, in line with the actual command itself. So moving now downwards into the script, we now calculated that stratification. We then exported that stratification, so that's useful. But then we want to cross-tab that stratification, and we're going to cross-tab on the stratify range field, which again is something that we had up above here, right? So that's here. And in cross-tabbing on that, we can then add in the columns category the pay year month, subtotaling on, and notice now how I do this a little bit differently here. Notice up here we could have had invoice amount 2 in quotes. I actually, so in other words, in percentage marks, so I could have done it like that, but purposely I did it like that just to show you, again, how you can use variables a little bit differently in ACL. In this case, we can do invoice amount, which would be, in this case, we use the word check underscore amount, and then just put a 2 right after it, so that that's now how we can define that particular field in that crosstab query. And then that is going to go to a file called crosstab stratify value. And then I also did it on the volume itself, so we're subtotaling the value here first. And we could just get rid of the this count field because we don't need it there. And then we're going to subtotal or stratify on the count separately. So I'm going to have a cross-stratify value and a cross-stratify volume. And down below here, we're then just going to delete some of the temporary tables that were created in this process, so we don't need them, and we get rid of them. And let's run this, but then I want to show you how I want to make one last edit to this particular script to make it even better. But again, let's now run it so that we can see the results. So just closing the stratification script, I will save it, and by right-clicking and selecting Run, I can select the sample file, which we'll use the paid file. In this case, again, shows up here. In the amount, check amount. In the date, let's put that enter date, hit OK. Does a couple of things. And now we have the year-month strat table, which is somewhat useful, but a little hard to read and utilize, but we did export that data. And then what I really like is this cross-stratified value. Now, what's kind of interesting as you look at this is, again, it's not maybe sorted in the best possible way, as we noted here, and hence why I wanted to play around with this. And as you look at the cross-tabulate, even though we don't have it here, you can cross-tabulate on multiple rows. So we're going to actually do that here in a second. So let's go back into our script for editing. So now going into the stratification script, we're actually going to go down to the stratify order computed field, but notice how this is a numeric field. So we could do this one of two ways, but it's best to keep it as a numeric for purposes of the sort order. It makes it a lot easier for sorting purposes. However, we want to create a new field, so we're going to create a stratify order character, and let's do this down by the crosstab. So what we can do here is we're going to say delete field, stratify order, CHR, OK. And that just, make sure that if it was there, it's going to delete it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say define field, stratify order, character. And in this case, we're going to take a string function of the stratify order field. And that string function, let's keep it to a 12, and maybe what I'll do is I'll all trim this particular item as well. So that is going to create this stratify order field. We're going to all trim it, but yet it's going to calculate that. And then now that we have this field, I can add that to my stratify range. So now that I have that field in there, and it needs to be a character field because you can't cross-tab on a value field, so we have to do it that way. But now that we have that, we can always convert it back to a numeric once we're into that cross-tab. So now that, we'll take this function here, and in each one of these cross-tab queries, we're going to then say, let's go back and create define field, and delete field and define field. Now that we've cross-tabbed this item, we're going to then open it. We're then going to delete the field stratify order. We're going to define the field stratify order. And in this case, we now need to convert it back to a value so that it's more useful for sorting purposes. And the field is called stratify order character, and we're just going to put a 0 after it. So now that we have that set up, we just got to be real careful here and just go back to the original file that we opened up. And the original file that we had way back up here was called the year-month strat file. So we're going to open up year-month strat. So just moving all the way down here to this crosstab, we first calculate the stratify order character. So just to maybe be careful here, we're just going to open year-month strat again, just to kind of keep it simple here. We're then going to define that stratify order character field. We're going to cross-tab on it, using it. We're then going to now that we've opened up that new table, the crosstab table, we're going to stratify on the value, or excuse me, create a value of that. We're then going to do the whole process again, except this time we already have that first field defined in the year month strat. We have that character field defined, but we don't have this value field defined in this new crosstab. And again, we need to open up that crosstab. So let's be careful there. And in looking back now at the data I'm seeing, or the actual defined statements, I forgot the word computed, because this is a computed field. So we need to put the word computed wherever we're putting a defined field statement. So stratify order computed. And down below here, stratify order computed. And then everything else should work from there. So now let's run this one more time. And we're going to run it on the paid file, check them out, enter date. Everything seems to have run through. And now that I go to my value stratification, I can now sort in an ascending order on this item here. That's the character version of it. Let's go to the actual proper one and do a quick sort ascending. And notice here, we actually have it sorted the way we want it. Looks really great over here, obviously. And then over here, we have our values only in a more stratified format. And again, this is a really useful report because you can look across the next number of months and years and see how things change every month and year. And our goal here, especially if you put this into Excel and graph it, which is outside the scope of today, but if you do that, you're actually going to see trends in the data in certain months in a certain stratified category that you don't see in other fields or other months. And that's really interesting. I mean, just even looking at this kind of bogus data that we created here, in certain categories, you have data that really tends to be very, very consistent. I'm just looking at this whole row here. It's very consistent as you go across. Whereas other months, you see other data points popping out that never happen, except for maybe a month here, and it doesn't happen for a few more months. So it is a way of isolating change rather quickly from a time perspective and a size perspective.
Okay, so we wanted to jump into our next polling question. Polling question number 4, which is what word is used in the stratify command to break at a key field? Is it break, parse, key, or primary key? And while you are working on that, I did get one question in here to kind of do like a specific example, and I will do my best to kind of get to that point for you, so just give me 1 second. And we have most of you voting, which is great. We do appreciate it. We're running pretty well on time as well, although we definitely will be done by the 2 o'clock hour, and trying our best to kind of stay on time. So most of you are voted. I will keep that open. I do have one question I'm going to work to answer when we do come back. And other than that, if you have any other questions, feel free to let us know. Almost everyone has voted, so I'll just give it out there for another 10, 15 seconds or so for the rest of you to vote. And I will close that poll and share it with everyone. And correct answer is the break. So that's where the stratify command it will break. So, with that said, I did want to kind of jump back into the content. However, to show a specific example, one question came in. If you had like a log of changes within your vendor master file, so you have kind of the vendor number, who's making the change, and an enter date. and I'm using this paid file, which is an invoice file, so it's a little different here, but it should have, again, lots of listings of vendors and insurers and dates, so that should work. A simple way to see, how many times a person has impacted that vendor would be to use the summarize command, vendor number, the enter initial, and you don't really have to accumulate anything here. So we could just kind of work off of those two fields and say vendor, enter account, and that will then give you a count of how many times a person had touched that particular vendor. So that is an option. This is one way of kind of summarizing things. Another way, going back to the paid file, is instead of doing that, instead using the cross-tabulate, which we just kind of used a second ago, which now we can put the vendor number as the row and the enter initial as the column. Again, we don't have to accumulate anything, but we can include count. So you have the vendor number here, enter initial there, and then include count there. So we can process that. Now that I'll just create a cross vendor, and that will also kind of give you by vendor the number of changes by enterer, and a little bit of an easier way of seeing it as well. So you can kind of see by vendor, kind of who's entering what and where. You can get even more crazy. Some of the things I think we talked about is setting up like a date range, and you could almost like summarize it by person and date and vendor number 2. So that is another option as well. Now, one of the thoughts, one of the questions coming in is, why define the stratified limits as opposed to using ACL to do that? I just find sometimes the ACL version, when you export it, maybe I'll just go back to this one here just rather quickly. Oh, I think I have it opened up already, sorry. So another question coming in, why kind of, create this code to create Stratify when you already have it in here? One other thing is that it allows you to kind of add it on to a particular file. So, for your payment file, it just is kind of interesting if you ever wanted to, summarize that file. You can just summarize on the Stratify range field. So that's one reasoning. The other thought, though, is, and the reason I did this originally was if we are, say, stratifying on check amount and going to free, 0, 100, 1,000, 10,000, and we go to an output of an ACL file, so we call this, stratified, fixed or something like that. I just find that this format is just really hard to work with, and hence why I kind of like to calculate my own fields in this column here, so I really know exactly what this is. It's like 0 to 100 or something, and then this one is 101 penny to the next one or something like that. But that kind of definition that I'm using that Stratify script is why we're doing it. So hopefully that makes sense. Just looking at the questions, I think we've answered all of them. Thank you for answering the poll here. And with that said, what I wanted to jump into now, a little bit more advanced stuff. We're going to talk about actually exporting all of your data files from ACL into like an Excel or a comma separated value format or whatever you'd like. And I find this to be an interesting thing because I find exports of data from ACL a lot of times can take a great deal of time, and I find that because of that, it's almost better to let ACL and let some code that we have that we're going to walk you through these main and sub and routines will kind of show you how to do. And what I normally will do is do a lot of my ACL processing, and then after I've done my ACL processing, I kind of go back and then export everything at the end, because a lot of times the ACL part of it will work within 5 minutes and I'm done, and I ran 100 reports and I'm all done. Now I need to export it to Excel, and that seems to take a lot of time sometimes just because exporting
excuse me, to Microsoft or something like that, or writing to my hard drive takes a while. So, with that said, we therefore just try to break it up. And what's nice about this script is that you're able to kind of select which tables you want to export. So you don't have to export everything. You could just export the ones that you want. So hopefully you'll like this one. It's I find it to be quite useful. And just give us a second here and we'll get that going. Thank you. So what we have is basically two scripts and then one table that you're going to need. And the scripts work off of one another, the main to the sub. And what it does is it basically will open up the sub script, look to that tables to export file, and then export that file in more of an XLS type fashion. What's kind of cool though about this is that you can actually set a folder of where you want the work to go. So this is something where over time, instead of having on your hard drive, which we all get used to here in ACL, having everything kind of show up in this one folder here, what you could do is export to this folder here like I've done. This is the workbook or work paper export folder. And notice I've kind of tested and exported all of my files there. Now, you do need to create whatever folder on your hard drive that you want, but again, let's say you're doing your vendor to employee matching and you want to set up a folder for that. That you could do here. Then you could do some unrecorded liability test work. That could be another folder. And we're going to show you in this ACL script how you can adjust that accordingly and export the proper data to the proper place in your ACL setup. So let me now go over to ACL. We're going to be working with these two scripts as well as one table. So let's just do that. So the table, let's start out with that one. I like to put, in my test input files, these are files that are more constant, and we'll talk about these today. The one that we're working with is called tables to export. And this will have all of the standard tables actually that come with the tool set. So we have the employee master file, paid invoice file, vendor master file, tables to keep, keywords, and tables to export. So it's basically nothing created, and we're just kind of exporting that. So let's go look into now the script that is going to export that data. Again, keep in mind, the tables to export table, you're going to put in here what you want to export from ACL. So if you had other work paper files that were created and that's what you want to export, you would put that in the table setup here. Okay, so in the actual work paper export, we have the main, and I'm going to just use this little push pin. I don't know if you use these a lot, I do. And then you could open up the sub and push pin that down. And now that they're push pinned, you can now work between those scripts, and especially now that it's in a much nicer format to look at, it makes it a lot easier to work with as well. So in working through this particular program here, what we're first going to do is we're going to open up the tables to export table. And we're going to count that. And I think if you look at this one, there was 6 items in there. So it's going to count 6, and then it's going to set the record count equal to count 1. And that's a variable, so if I just run my count here, I think everyone knows this, but if I run my count and I go to edit variables, notice count 1 is equal to 6. So that's that variable that ACL automatically sets. And then I'm going to set up my V counter equal to 1. Then it's going to close that table, tables to export. So now what we're going to do is we're going to call this other program, SO1, edit my code here. I used to call it PO1, so we're going to call it SO1 work paper export sub while the counter is less than the record count counter. So basically counter equals 1, it is less than 6, so we can continue on and go to the sub. So now it's going to kind of loop around between these two scripts until it's done with all 6 tables exported. Okay, so what does it do here? It opens up the table to export. It locates record vCounter, which is 1. So it locates that record, and it says vTable equals table. Take a look at this field here. It's called table. So it's going to take the first name. If I just so if we say locate record. Actually, you know what? Bear with me. I need to assign this one here, and vCounter equal to 1. Okay, then we go over here, locate record vCounter, right? 1, and then it's going to say vTable equals table. Now that I have that, I can now go into my edit variables and notice vTable is equal to the employee master file. So now, saved in ACL's brain is employee master file. I clean it up a little bit here by all trimming it. So we have the vTable clean, and then I close that table. So that's just going to be something I do just to clean it up a little bit. And then down here, this is a little bit of code I got from ACL. It's really nice code. I don't understand it that well, but it's okay. What it's going to do is it's going to automatically open up your ACL document. It's actually going to read your ACL document, and it's going to create a file called temp folder content, and it's going to figure out what is the project name within that particular document. And in that project name, it's going to figure out where is it saved on your hard drive. So what it's going to end up doing is calculating a new variable called vPathToProject, which is here, which is going to be your hard drive. And in my case, my hard drive right now, it's D, AuditNet D, 2012 webinar series, webinars, October 09. That's where it's going to calculate. Now, what I'm going to do, just to add a little more to the action, I'm going to add another folder called Work Paper Export, which is, I think we were just showing you a second ago where I deleted those files from Work Paper Export. Now, you do need to make sure that that folder does exist, just repeating that, because ACL will look for that folder and say it doesn't exist. But what I'm then doing is, now that I know where it is, it's now going to add that extra folder. It's going to then add employee master file. Again, that was what was calculated up here, .xlsx. Okay, so now we have a structure of the entire path to the work paper export with the XLSX on the end of it. Then we're going to basically close this temp folder content. So all of this was happening within a new table that ACL created to figure out what the project name was, but also where does it exist on the hard drive. And then once I know where I'm going and I've set up this path, I can then open up the vTable clean, which is employee master file, export fields all XLSX, which is Excel, to this vPathToProject XLSX. Now, in doing this, I'm just noting like a bunch of things here with regards to variable names. First off, that when you do open up a table, that you need to put the percentage marks around it. When also we are setting up the vPathToProject here, I find that it's also a good idea to put the percentage marks around it within the quotes. And that way the quotes are there for the most part so that the structure, if you do have like spaces in between, like AuditNet like that's a space there. I don't know if you see that. I don't know if I lost it. Hold on. I don't know how. Yep. Okay. So notice how I have like a space within the AuditNet and then D in the 2012 and the webinar series. So because of those spaces, it's a really good idea to put the basically the quotation marks around it. And then it'll export the file, and these are just some, it's things like this that you'll spend a lot of time trying to figure out why isn't this running, and the reason is, you're just forgetting a little double quote, in the file. So, okay, once we have that, we close the table, and then we have a vCounter now, which it used to be 1. We're now going to say it's vCounter, the old vCounter plus 1. So we're basically turning vCounter into 2 in this case. Okay. Then it's going to go back to the main and start over again and say, okay, V counters 2 is at less than 6. Yep. Then it's going to go back. Then it's going to locate record 2, in this case, which is paid invoice file, and it's going to go through that whole process again. Where is it? Where does it exist? Etc. There's probably a little bit of inefficiency in that I'm doing this directory of ACL each time, so there might be a little bit of again of some inefficiency there, but it's okay. It really goes very, very quickly. What I find is exporting to Excel can take a lot of time, and sometimes it's better to do all of your ACL work first and then have an export routine second, and that's what this would be. So now that I've explained this quite a bit, what I wanted to do, let me just think about that. Yeah, I think I just saved that small change there between the P and the S, so I think we're okay here. Now what I can do is I can run this WP export main, and what it's doing is very, very quickly here, it's exporting all of those files, and we should have a log here. Yep, we're all done, and now so basically it was done and the execution of that completed. And now that I go to my hard drive and go to my work paper export folder, notice I have all of these files that we just were talking about in ACL have now been exported to Excel. So again, just talking a little bit more in this series about how to export all of your items. Similarly, what I wanted to now talk about is the auto deletion. So it's kind of the reverse of what we just talked about of exporting files and creating. Now we're going to delete files. And we have 3 types of programs here that we're running. One is just a kind of a overall script that kind of manages the other scripts, and that's called main. And I like to use that nomenclature of main, so that's the main one. Then it's going to run this table summary, where it's basically going to figure out what are all the tables in your ACL document. And it's going to use a very similar technique to what we just used before when ACL had to open up that directory. Then it's going to go through every file, and if it does not exist on a table called tables to keep, it will delete it. So if that file does not exist, it will delete it. So again, this is now the reverse technique that we just talked about a second ago. And what we're now going to be doing is, let's just go over to the script here. So we did the export one. We're done with that. Now we're going on to deletion. So I can't stress it enough. Be careful on this one so that you don't destroy all of your work one day. The tables to keep file, again, uses the same kind of nomenclature. Table is the field name. And in here, I have every file name. Now, what you probably can't see, and I just need to blow it up here so that you can see it, is that I do have underscores in between each of the files. And that's a really good idea because notice here we have the underscores as well. So just keep that in mind that you want to have those underscores there. And again, these are the files we're going to keep. Notice how, just to keep it simple, they're the same files that are in the tables to export, tables to keep. Okay, so now that we have all this here, we're going to open up the Reset ACL System main. And first off, what I'm going to do, don't have to do this, but I set my folder to tables, but again, don't really have to do that. And then we develop a table of all of the tables in the ACL project. So what this is doing here is I'm going to move on to this next script, which is the table summary auto. And this is something that ACL provided. It's a nice little program here. And I used pieces of it. I ended up commenting out. You can see the green comment code where I've used pieces of it where it was necessary or where it was useful. And in this case, what we're doing is we're having this ACL code, which I'm not going to go into depth in explaining. It came from tech support, and it's worked for me for many years now. But what it does is it actually creates, it kind of goes right into that directory file, that ACL file that we talked about, the project. It imports it back in. it's kind of weird, like a print file, and then it creates a new table of that. And I just want to scroll. You see all this gobbledygook code. It's sort of tough to read and work with. What I was just going to try to focus you in on is one key fact, and that is that when we define the field being defined, table name is 35 characters long. So we basically are creating, or it is creating a table name called 35 characters. And I'm pretty sure that that's the limit in ACL for these types of fields. So that's why we're getting to that level. And then all of this other stuff, quite frankly, the field name, the field type, etc., doesn't really matter to me. I could have deleted it, but I just kept it for posterity's sake. And once we've done that, it is basically going through and calculating the size of the fields and the types of each field and all that stuff. And it's actually not a bad thing to run, and we'll probably, let me run that on its own anyway, just for fun here. So let me just see if I can kind of run this on its own. And that did not come out very nicely. Bear with me 1 second. Let me just let me try to run that again. For some reason, my little ACL scripting is not working too well. Not sure exactly why, but something to take a look at. I did run this the other day, and it seemed to work quite well. And the only thing I could think of, I know I was playing around a little bit. We were playing around with the text files and such, but that is kind of weird. So let me take a look here, just kind of quickly here, to try to understand why this might have gone off like that a little bit. And normally what you can do is kind of do like an analyze file, and that brings it back into structure here. Let's see. That's it's not going to allow me. And the reason, let me just take a look here, is it looks like I'm going beyond the actual field layout here. So I got to figure out why that's happening. Looks like this is 91 characters here, and that looks okay. But for some reason, when we're actually defining the fields, we go much further than that. Well, let me try to fix this. In setting this up, looks like everything is kind of good, quite frankly, until I get to. Let me just go through this. Sorry about this, folks. While you have to hold on here, but we're just going to go here. I'm going to attempt. Let me try to. I'm kind of curious to see if. Let me just do one thing. Oh, yeah, because I'm using that file, aren't I? Let me just see here if it's something where I made a mistake, because I know I tested this the other day and it worked wonderfully. Let me just retry that one more time. Now that I've fully deleted that file, let me just delete that from here, delete that from there as well. And we're going to just go to our scripts here. Just run this one more time. Look at that. Okay, so what must have happened was, in all of my playing around, I must have created a file that kind of kept itself out there, and wasn't very nice in working with this script editor. Now, hopefully you won't experience that same issue, but I think that was just because I was testing around. What I was going to do, and I just want to show you what I was out to do there, was I was going to keep all of this code, and right when I got to this table name part, what I was noticing was this format, 92 to 15. This was okay. We were okay because it was 91 characters big, but what I was finding was going from 92 to 15, for some reason, that old table that we had a length of 91 versus 106, and I'm not exactly sure why. But because of that, it was kind of fooling ACL and not allowing that to work properly. But again, glad we were able to fix it. If anything, if you ever experience that issue, one thing I would say is delete the data table definition all manually in that, I think it was temp folder content as well. I deleted those 2 files, and upon doing that, everything worked beautifully. So, okay, now that we have that, that was my ultimate goal, was to show you this, was we now have this table name with all of the fields. And what I'm going to do is in the code, a little bit later in this code here, we then summarize on this table name. We'll just do this to a file called sum, just for lack of anything better. And notice here we get the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tables that are here for analysis purposes. And please note that the data table definition all is not there because that was something that was created recently. The sum one has also just been created recently, and that isn't here, right? So I mean that's just not going to be in that list. So when we continue through the script and we open up the tables to keep, notice first off we make the field table name 35 characters, and that's going to match up with this table name 35 character here. And the reason I know it's 35 characters, which is right here, is because that's what was set in that ACL script that we were showing you. So now that that's set up, we have to set this one up to equate to that one. And we open up the table, the data table definition all. We then summarize on that table name that we just did. And then I join those 2 together in an unmatched format. So by joining the 2 together in an unmatched format, I'm going to get a file called tables to delete. And when I run this, the data table definition all and sum will be part of that tables to delete. Once that's done, the tables to delete, we will then follow a very similar logic. So again, tables to delete will include sum and data table definition all. Then it'll have a count of 2 when we run a count on that. And then very similar to the export routine that we just ran a second ago, now we're just going to do like a delete routine. So we're going to open up the sub program down here. It's going to open up tables to delete, find record 1, what is the table name, let's say it's data table definition all. It assigns it to that, and then we're going to delete the format vtable, which is data table definition all. That's going to be deleted here, and then this other file here, table plus .fil, will be deleted as part of that. And whenever you have a delete table.fil okay, that will actually go out to your hard drive and delete what is on the hard drive. So keep that in mind. Then it's going to set the counter +1, go back to the main, do it again. Now it's going to find the sum file, delete that one, and it's going to delete that all the way through. So again, just in summary there, even with a little bit of a problem there, we figured it out. Ultimately, what this thing is going to do is it's going to run an ACL type script that will identify all of your tables in your ACL document. Once it does that, it then is going to join it with a file called tables to keep in a unmatched way so that it finds the ones like data table and sum. Then it's going to do a routine of subbing and deleting those files that are, in this case here, deleting those files that are not on the keep list, are the ones that get deleted. Okay, so this is now reset ACL main. Again, I'm going to have this nasty thing that'll say, please, don't do this without thinking about it. You'll hit the OK button, and then it'll run through. And notice here that the sum, the data table definition have been deleted, and we now have the main tables remaining in here. So okay, sorry about that. Just up to the next polling question. what command needs to be at the end of every group set of statements. And I got to admit, we may or may not have gone over this one because I may have skipped over this as I was answering that one question on the vendor side. But it would be a group, and then what else needs to be on the other side. Most of you have gotten it right, with that said, but this may have been one that was not completely reviewed with you folks. With that said, we will go over this and quickly talk about the group command, as well as what's kind of left on the agenda for today is going over some best practices, as well as to take a look at kind of like a keyword search. You know, a lot of times people ask about doing like an employee to vendor matching, and I have a kind of a nice one that, you know, really is, as you'll see, it kind of takes the one name and then searches with that name throughout the vendor name. So you're not really, it's kind of like a much more fuzzy match because you're say taking the last name of the employee and looking throughout that entire vendor field. So let me just, if everyone who'd like to vote could vote there, we'd appreciate it. Just making sure you're processing that in. I'm just going to share that poll, and most of you, almost all of you were right, so thank you. I wasn't sure if we went over this completely, but the group and end statement will be has to be at the end of a group, just to kind of let ACL know when groups take place. So with that said, let me get back into our work here. And what I wanted to do just quickly is to note the grouping. Even though we asked the question, I know we've touched on it a little bit. But I think the main power of it is its ability to kind of group together a lot of extract statements or calculation statements that reduces a lot of processing time because you're going through the ACL file once. So there are some other options like grouping of if and else and etc. It gets even more advanced than I think what we want to be talking about today, so I'm going to kind of move on from it. And one other kind of note as we go through this, I've noted it a couple of times, but I definitely want to note it as a final time. We'll do it at the end as well. You will be getting all of the files that we're talking about today. It's going to take about a week, but you will get them. You'll get the videos that actually will go into more depth on things like the group and all of these things that we talked about, like the exporting of files, the keywords, searching, etc. So it is something where I know we're going through a fair amount of intermediate and advanced stuff here, but you should be able to pick it up, especially by kind of watching the videos a few times. One question came in, which is, how would we be able to kind of add something on so that the table would be unique for this given data run? And there are a lot of things that you could do for that. I mean, you could create a dialog box, have a variable created called, user defined or something. And just in this part of the code, of the export code that we were talking about, you would then add in that, like user defined code or something. And then that would kind of add on, to the table name in the actual exporting. Now, I guess in this particular case, I need to note that's not completely true because this is actually picking up that field name, but it would be more in the actual exporting side. So I have this thing called vTableClean down here. I think we would just actually have to create a new variable, just to be careful here. Let me just make sure I'm not kind of completely lying to you here. Yeah, so I think we'd want to create a new one, which would be, in this case, like, vTableClean export, and it would include, in this case, the table name, obviously, and then you can add on to it a few different things. I mean, one option would be to add on a date to it, and you can convert that date over to a character. You could do this user-defined thing that we just talked about, so if you wanted to add in some other text, and you just have to make sure that that was the variable name that you're using in the export statement down here. So down here, instead of that, vTableClean, you'd want like vTableClean export. So
hopefully that helps answer some questions that are coming in. And we will kind of take one last break before the end. I know we're kind of touching up towards the end here, but did want to go through this last concept of keyword search to vendor search. And then we're going to conclude with some just best practices in scripting and just kind of final notes and such. But we will get done on time, just probably about 5 minutes or so before the hour, 2 o'clock. But just letting everybody know. So bear with us a few more minutes here, and we will be going through these last two concepts. Okay, so what we were going to talk about now is the keywords search and vendor to employee name searching, and talking about a main and subroutine, but also a more, let's say, more extensive type of, I guess, join within ACL. So we're basically going to be joining across two different files, so that's how we'll work on that. And the key statement, although it's a little hard to read, it's a little easier now in ACL to read this. You basically are going to kind of create two blank fields, and on those blank fields join the files. And in this case, the key here is that we're actually selecting a file, input search through ext dot search through field converted. What that's going to do is it's actually going to kind of like join the file, but do an if statement where it's looking into the file, the secondary file that it's joining with. So in this case, the secondary file is called input search through ext, and it's going to kind of search through that file, that secondary file with this main file. So a little bit more complex of a script routine, and something that I wanted to show you in ACL just so that you could see a little bit more of an advanced type of technique being used in a scripting type fashion. There's a couple of different ways that this can be done. There's a text matching script, and we'll talk about how this works. And actually, let me run it first, because I think this is kind of a cool one to run for you. So we're going to run this one, and we're going to select, what are we going to search through? We're going to search through the vendor master file in this case. And using the vendor master file, we're going to then search through it. Notice here the vendor master file shows up top here. We'll talk about that in a second. We're going to search through that. Basically, we're going to select the vendor name field. Okay, so that's the field that we're going to search through. Then, what are we going to search on? We're going to search on the employee file. So we're going to use that, I guess on through the other one. And we're going to use the last name. So does the employee last name show up in a vendor master file listing anywhere? Let's hit that OK button. And sure enough, let me just kind of make this a little bit bigger. So now Friedman is now Friedman Consulting, Jacobs, Eric Jacobs, Cox, Cox Executive Supplies. So these are how we've taken this field here and searched through this other field here. And notice we have the search on field converted and the search through field converted here. The search on was in the secondary table, and the search through was obviously in the primary table. So again, when you look at this, this particular statement here, so, well, it's probably better to look in ACL. You can kind of see how this is utilizing both fields in this type of join statement. Okay, so let's go to that, and then let's go to this text matching script. So the first dialog box asks you, what field do you want to search through?
And this is a good thing to show you for our later discussion on dialog boxes. Notice we have input search through. That's the variable being created, and it's being selected from tables. So input search through, it's the variable being created. When I go down to this dialog here and open it up and click on this, notice what is in that edit box but input search through. So this edit box here, what we've kind of automatically done is put as a variable the input search through in there. So it's going to automatically show up there. Now I guess you could change it there, but in the most part it's just going to come up as a box that you can change. And that was this edit box here. It's then going to search through field, and that's the search through field here. And it continues onward where this was the search through, this is the search on type work. Now, what it's going to do is it's going to create a blank field in both tables. So it's going to create this blank field through, it's going to create a record number, and then it's going to convert the search through field, which is the vendor name field, by all trimming it and setting it to more of an upper type of a situation. And then it's going to extract the blank field, the record number through, the search through, converted to a new file called input search through. And the reason I do this extract statement of just a few key fields is a couple of reasons. One, the record number noted, look, all of these fields are more in a calculated format, which I don't really like. I always like to kind of fix them in ACL. So now it's a fixed field, one blank space, a fixed field, the record number. It's something where it's now, just to kind of show you in the data what I mean by fixed field, that it's in there. It's in that data now. It's not some calculation that we've created here, like some calculated field. It's actually in the data. Also, the data file is a lot smaller. So just as a script best practice, if you're about to do a very large join between two files, that it's a really good idea to kind of do so with this concept of keeping the files as small as possible, because the smaller you can keep the file, the easier the join will work, and etc. So with that said, what we can then do is it will then open up the input on, which was the employee file, and do the same thing. And then what it's going to do is doesn't really matter so much at this point, but I think we do this on some purpose. This is kind of the key statement. It goes back to, why is this the most key statement here? The first thing is that the key points are that it's a many-to-many search or join. It's a many-to-many join on a blank field. So it's a blank field, many-to-many search. When you have a many-to-many search on a blank field, what that's going to do is it's going to create a file of every record matched up to every record. So again, imagine this massive file now of every record matched up to every record called search file 1. Now, the good news is it's only going to do this if, and that's where we get to this part, if when searching through, basically taking that search on field, in this case, let's just take the search on field from the employee file. Let me just kind of open up one of these. So it's going to take the word COX, and it's going to take COX, and if it says if it finds COX throughout that file in the secondary file, again, this is kind of noting now we're looking into the secondary file and searching through that vendor name field. So it's only, even though I'm going to be doing this many-to-many join of every field to every field, I'm only doing it when there's a match of COX in that vendor name field. So in this case here, where COX matches somewhere in here. It doesn't have to start out with it. It's just, it's somewhere within that particular field, and that's why we use the find function here. So again, a little more complex because we're doing many-to-many joins. I'm doing it on a blank field, which is kind of weird because it's going to create this massive file. But once I've done that, I then figure out, what are all of the matches in this case. And then I can take those matches and join it back to the original file to figure out which are all the records that, we kind of match up here. And then we can do the same thing with the employee file and, kind of get all of the ones that are matching up here. But in this case, what we're then doing is we're taking the, all of the fields from the vendor file and matching it up with all of the fields in the employee file. And that's, this is kind of figuring out what were those matching record numbers in the through, and let's kind of, match those up, and then which are all the record numbers in the on, and then match that up as well based on this search file 1 and 2. So that's going to end up getting you this final table here that has all of the employee fields matched up to all of the vendor fields. Last but not least, we then delete all of my temporary files, and probably we talked about this in previous discussions, but I always like to clean up after my batch, after my scripting. I like to figure out what are all the new fields that I created, what are all, and delete those from the original tables. What are all the tables that I should be deleting and all of the formats that I should be deleting? And ultimately, you can open up the final file if you'd like, and then setting, say, safety to on or safety off, depending on what you want to do from this point forward. So again, this is kind of showing a lot of different techniques and something to refer back to. What I now want to do is kind of take this one little step forward, if you could believe that, and we're going to go into the keyword searching. So now, that we're in this keyword searching, what I'm going to do here is actually create a table of keywords, which I've done, and I have that in my test input files. You'll get this, table as well. I don't know how good this is, but, it's my best attempt at coming up with words that look really weird to be in general ledger or accounts payable files: casino, cash, consultant, drug, eBay, etc., flowers, etc., etc. Some other funny ones in here as well. So, you can take a look at that. And what we end up doing here is, in this keywords script, is we use a very similar technique that we just used before, but in this particular case, we're going to look through 3 fields, and we're going to use the same technique that we talked about, where we're going to kind of search through and on, and then we're going to do these 2 final joins at the end to ultimately kind of get all of the answers. So let's kind of quickly walk through this and try to show you my best attempt at coming up with some decent variable structures. So here I have the invoice input file. I probably should have put a V underscore T for table, but then we have the paid invoice file. There we have V underscore IH for invoice header, and then the vendor name equals vendor name, invoice number, and vendor address. And all of this relates to the paid invoice file. So if you take a look at this paid invoice file, you'll notice the field names as you cut across here are things like vendor name and invoice number, and etc. So that's all listed out there. And vendor name, invoice number, vendor address. Then what we're doing is we're opening up the keywords table that we just opened up a second ago and setting the keyword field equal to keyword. And again, if I open up that table, just bear with me, you'll notice here the field name is called keyword. Okay. Now that I have that, pretty much follow the same logic. The only thing that I do, though, is I create a computed field that adds together, bear with me, the vendor address, the invoice number, and the vendor name that were all in that paid invoice file. So I just kind of put it all together because I'm looking, you could add together 10 fields, right? I mean, have a description field, the other, purchase order description field, all of these different fields to be put in here. But what ACL is then going to do is, based on this join that it's going to complete, is it's going to search through every one of those fields as one big field. And I did that on purpose just to make it one field. It's a lot simpler for my script to have one field that I'm searching through. Again, same technique, create the blank fields, join on the blank field in a many fashion. Again, it's a many-to-many, so every record is joined up to every record, and that's going to create that key field search 1 table, which in this case, I believe all I really need to do is join that up with the invoice input table based on that record number field. And with that said, once I have that key search field, what I'll do is I'll break my program right here. So we're just going to put the word break there, and then you can kind of see what's ultimately going to come out of this one. So let's go to this keyword script. I'm going to run it through. It gets to the word break, which is appropriate. And it created a file called keyword search 01. And what that is a table structure that has the record number within the invoice or the paid invoice file for every time it found something weird, like the word freight or equipment or charity or what else do we have here? I think that's about it, that it found, and it has those record numbers. Then it takes that list of record numbers and joins it back to the original table. Bear with me. To that original table, and in this case, being able to then identify all of the potential items that have been found. Let me just find that join there, and again, just starting with the original table, and then joining on the invoice input. And then from a fields point of view, it's going to bring over from that keyword search table the keyword that it looked through, the actual the actual field that was calculated, the record number, and then it'll also then join with that paid invoice file and get all of that as well. And that's from this point forward is in the script. So let me just copy this part here to a new script. Keep it simple here, and I'm just going to copy that to here, and then I'm just going to run that new script. And that completed kind of the last portion of my work here that I needed to complete, and then that basically gave me the outputs for this analysis. Let me just so here is the keyword AP01 keyword search. Again, table AP01 being kind of the first work paper that we produced. We have then the keyword, did it search through to find that, the record number, and then every field from the paid invoice file then lined up next to that over on the right.
Okay, so just kind of getting towards the tail end of the day here, I just wanted to go over a few script best practices with you, so I'm just going to kind of jump back into the slides for the remainder here, and just have some concluding statements as well as a final question that we need to ask. But just some of the best practices. Set safety off and on. I know someone noted they had trouble with it, but I haven't really had that in the past much. So I do need to note that. I mean, maybe the only other thing I could think of is if a file is open already somewhere else on the computer, that ACL may not be able to overwrite it, but set safety off works really well. I like setting up a lot of the variables up front in the script so that you can find them. I even include a variable script to itself, so that way you have all your variables in one place. I used to code into a text editor, but I've now used the ACL editor. And when I do code, I comment throughout the code using the comment in ACL, because you just forget what you've done otherwise. I use pause statements to stop at the end of things and let me know something's finished. So that can be useful. It makes a ding sound usually when you finish, so you kind of get the ding and know that the processing is over. We talked about delete all OK being a useful tool to get rid of variables, and deleting files. The deleted sorted.fil and then the format sorted OK. The first one again will extract or delete the actual file on your hard drive. The next one will delete the format that's in ACL. putting a lot of your scripts together into one script and kind of having a, do script 1, do script 2, do script 3, it kind of sets up almost like a recipe plan where you can have, in one script in ACL, all of the scripts that you're going to run, and it's a nice little index of what you're about to do. Along the lines of indexing, we like to kind of number scripts. Some people use like S01 for S for script, S01 underscore 01, 0102, just kind of keeping that numerical sequence so when you're in ACL, you can kind of quickly see what you're working with. We didn't talk much about it, but there is some logic to using either sort or pre-sort. A lot of times I will sort files. I will create a file called sorted, in that case, to overwrite it, so I'm not wasting a lot of disk drive space, but again, useful. You can kind of format the sizing of dialog boxes, and that's more in the setting for each of the dialog boxes that you're setting up, and that can be good just to kind of get a consistency. And we also talked about setting up the folders in ACL where you can kind of put your data files into a particular folder. So I have all these script best practices I like to throw out there, and I know that we talked about at least 95% of these today in depth. So I'm glad we got through it. And really just getting on to the final polling question of the day. What function allows you to search through a certain field in ACL? Is it the find, the look, the write, or the mid function? So it's going to allow you to kind of search through a particular file. As we're concluding here, last few minutes for the morning or afternoon now, for all of us, if you could, feel free to post any questions that you have, as we will be trying to finish up in the next 6 minutes or so. So most of you have voted, and again, what function allows you to search through a field, find, look, write, or mid? Just keep that open for a few more seconds here, just for those that wanted to just make sure that they're getting their CPE credits for things. We're just trying to track attendance this way. We appreciate it. All right, I'll just keep that open another 10 seconds or so. All right, well, I will close that poll and share it with everybody. And as you see, the find function, correctly by most of you stated, will look through an entire field and look for whatever you're looking for. So in our case, we were looking a lot for the last name of the employee, looking through the vendor name. So if there are any questions, feel free to post them. I'm going to kind of jump on. I'm going to wait for the questions, but also just note, we have a few other training dates coming up, talking about automating your control activity. It's not an ACL course. It's more of a general/Excel course. We'll touch on ACL a little bit, but that's coming up next week. And again, on November 6th, we have a Kickstarting ACL on October 15th. We are doing the script one again on December 4th. And right before that, the day before, we're doing a Kickstart Your ACL class as well. So did want to kind of note some of the data analytic training that we have. Jim has a lot of other training out on AuditNet, so do look out there for fraud training, for IDEA software training. I think there's some IT training as well, so I'm probably missing some.
Well, that's terrific, Rich, and thank you for presenting today. I learned a lot about scripting with ACL. And one other thing that Rich fails to mention is that if you want Rich to do an on-site program, he does on-site programs for ACL and data analytics, and I've been to his presentations. Rich probably did not mention that he is billed as the data magician, and he does magic tricks. He's an amateur magician. So, if you want Rich to come to your organization, please contact him directly. And I think that you also have our contact information. Should be up there on a slide.
Yep.
There's also the audit software videos, which are a great opportunity for just-in-time training and training without travel. And those videos are, a a great way to cover special topics just at the time you need them. You always have that question. I'm doing an audit in this area, and how do I use data analytics? Rich has taken these videos and put them down into bite-sized pieces, if you will, and they represent a great opportunity for you. So if you have any questions, please feel free to call or contact us. And Rich has got the screen up there for the software videos. There's a couple of demo videos out there. You can see what it's like, and it really is the next generation way to learn audit software. So
yeah, thanks, Jim. And I did want to note to everyone, because a question came in on it, this is where you're going to go to get your files and videos. And actually what you're going to end up getting as part of this course is you're going to get 3 courses. You're going to get the videotaping of this course, which is September 10th, and that'll be listed. And you'll also get 3 others, and it's I believe June 7th, June 19th, the intermediate scripting, and then October 9th. But if you click on them now, I'm just letting you know, you will get, well, I don't think I signed in, you'll kind of get this you need access. So give us about a week. We're going to load up the video for September 10th. We're going to put 101 ACL applications out there. We're going to give you access, and we'll email you like an email address and a password, and you'll be able to sign in and get whatever you'd like from here. But yeah, thanks again, Jim, for noting. We have entire training programs in audit software videos. You can just buy the videos, just watch things that way. And, it is a great way to kind of go back to like that export to Excel, exporting all the files to Excel. You might not use that for another 6 months, but then 6 months from now you need to remember how to do it. We do, therefore give you that ability to go back and be able to access those videos for a year and take a look. So definitely take a look at that, and thanks again.